submit those. So a quick agenda for today. First, we're going to start with a summer recap presented by San Lee. Then we're going to take a look at demand forecast for fall 2014. Jefferson's then going to walk us through the generation outlook, and then we'll finish up with transmission and congestion analysis and implemented and upcoming market changes. So I'm going to pass it over to San Lee to walk us through what happened over the summer.
So looking at the past summer, we were seeing much cooler temperatures than average, mostly just in the Midwest. We also had more precipitation pretty much in the MISO North and Central, and also a little bit extended into the MISO South. So that ended up, we were seeing a 114 roughly for the peak load for on July 22nd. That's the highest day of the MISO summer load. So that was for the demand. Moving into looking at some of the past overall on-peak average peak loads, we divided by either the monthly average and the monthly peaks. So for the monthly average part, it looks like on-peak average-wise, August looks to be the hottest, just aggregate level and zonal level. We also divided the average peak load by zones. So this way we can pretty much see how much load there is for the MISO North, MISO Central, and MISO South. So MISO Central had about 54 on-peak average-wise during August, and that cleared at around $36 for that whole month on-peak average-wise. Looking at the peaks for the summer, we had July and August still remaining pretty hot, but with July 22nd, that's the highest day of the summer. Aggregate level, we had a 114.7 as the peak load, and for that day, Central had about 64 gig as the peak load, versus the North was also reaching 25. So that actually cleared about $43. Which is still a little bit weaker than what we saw back in June, which cleared about $82 on June 17th, although demand did not reach the highest for the summer. So that was a summary for the summer load, the actual load. Following that, we'll be talking about some of the congestion that we used to see in the day ahead and the real time. So this slide, we had the top constraints that we saw back in the summer in the day ahead. So this is in hourly interval. We ranked them by the number of counts. So as you can see that a lot of the congestion we used to see back in the summer were pretty much concentrated around the Ottumwa area. That's in Iowa. And so a lot of that Ottumwa to Wayflow, Knoxville to Lucas congestion was pretty much due to Ottumwa still running back then. And also we had a lot of line outages around Burlington area. So that has been driving quite a bit of congestion around the Ottumwa area. The other one that we have been also seeing during the summer, which is more traditional congestion, that's the Monticello to East Windmack congestion. We see mostly in June. So there were work around Cumberland to Bush, Lafayette, and also we had pretty aggressive wind generation back in June around the central zone area, mostly around that fallow wind farm. So that has helped to drive a good portion of that Monticello to East Windmack congestion. The other one, sort of the new constraint that we see after the integration of the South, was the Greenwood transformer that's sitting on the bottom of this table. So Greenwood is pretty much around Mississippi, and we've been seeing that the pattern has been that whenever the temp hit around 90 or above, we would see pretty good flows from the Atala gas unit onto the Indianola. So whenever there's higher flows, pretty much approaching that 120, 130 threshold, there will be some Greenwood transformer posting. So for this constraint, we don't necessarily need a line outage to drive that. So it's pretty much due to just higher demand in Mississippi, and you got higher flows on this line. So that's another interesting constraint that we started to see back in the summer. Now let's look at the real-time. So the real-time congestion seems to be really similar to the day-ahead. We rank them by 5-minute interval count. We also had this average summer shuttle prices by number of hours during the summer on-peak. So looking at the real-time, again, there are a lot of similarities between the day-ahead and the real-time. Otoma to wave flow still took the first place in terms of the number of counts. The drivers remain really similar, just outages around Burlington and also Otoma units running over the summer. And of course, that has came down since about a month or so, and we've kind of stopped seeing congestion around the Otoma to Wavelo area. So that's one of the key constraints that we used to see in the summer. The other one that we also see was the Oak Grove to Galesburg congestion. This is also a pretty traditional congestion that we typically see. Outages were seen around Quad Cities to sub 91, and also it combines with a stronger wind generation that would typically drive a good portion of the Oak Grove to Galesburg. This typically is posting over the off-peak period in the real time when wind was typically stronger. So we usually see this mostly in the morning off-peak period before the on-peak. The other one that, like I mentioned earlier in the day-ahead, was that Greenwood transformer. Drivers is the same, just higher demand in Mississippi. We start to see higher flows from the Atala to in the NOAA line, and we've been seeing Greenwood posting pretty consistently back in the summer during the real time. So this is sort of a new constraint that we probably will be watching out for the coming winter. So that's about it for the past summer in terms of the day ahead and the real time. And we will be moving into Jefferson. We'll be talking about the coming fall.
Thank you, Sonley. So coming into the fall of 2014, we've taken a look at the fall season overall here on this graphic. Our last cooling degree days typically taper off by late September in north and central, the MISO classic footprint, and the regions begin their transition from to heating load from cooling load. In the south, in contrast, the cooling degree days typically linger quite a bit longer than the MISO classic portion of the footprint, and they don't really dissipate completely until early November. Overall demand steadily decreases until reaching a minimum late October, early November, and we begin to see heating load begin to drive demand back upwards as we sort of reach the last portion of the fall season there, mid to late November. Our forecast for the fall of 2014, we're looking for no strong deviations in the September to November period on average, although we'll see pockets of deviations across the footprint. The greatest risk of cool anomalies in southern portions of north, and the greatest risk of warm anomalies in southern portions of south. That would be the sort of Gulf Coast area from Texas over to Louisiana. The forecast was generally made using analog years for a weak neutral El Nino, and a warm risk to the forecast may develop, or warm risk to the forecast is El Nino has been struggling to develop, meaning that the anticipated strengthening of the El Nino has continued to be delayed, which may bring a warmer bias to our fall forecast. I'm going to dovetail into the fall 2014 generation outlook now. Going into wind generation, the fall is typically a ramp up season. We'll come out of the summertime low point in generation and ramp towards the annual peak in generation that occurs over the winter season. The fall season begins at around 30% capacity factor for the western portion of the wind generation area, before increasing to just under 50% by the end of the fall season. the central zone, which would be your Indiana type areas, Michigan, they typically start out at a lower level, near 20%, but they also ramp up through the end of the season, reaching a similar 50%. And they tend to show, the central area tends to show a delayed ramp before equaling the western area by the end of November. Generation, this is a look at the seasonal RSG capacity, and what we've done on this graphic here is compare year-over-year differences to 2013 to 2014. And we can see year-over-year RSG usage trends point to frequent events for smaller megawatt values compared to 2013. And we think that may be an indication that better overall commitment planning in MISO, as well as slightly higher reliance on real-time imports. And during the summer of 2014, you can see quite a departure from where we were in 2013. And we think that may have been a result of the generally weak summer that we saw across the region. We saw weaker than average temperatures and the correlating weaker than average demand. One unit in particular of interest that's been in the news a little bit over the summer, and can expect to see some news over the fall, is the Presque Isle power plant, and as to whether that plant is going to continue operating in the short to medium term or not. It's 344 megawatts of coal generation in the Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It's a We Energies plant, and We Energies is wishing to retire the plant. MISO continues to prevent the full retirement of the plant due to reliability concerns, and pretty much the linchpin in the retirement will be the addition of transmission capacity into the Upper Peninsula, but we may not see that for at least another year or two. New interconnections that are coming online for the fall season, basically looking at 2 wind farms in the western portion of the footprint. Minnesota, North Dakota combines about 350 megawatts coming in through the interconnection queue for the fall season. So nothing major on that front.
All right, thank you, Jefferson. Now to walk through our expectations for congestion in the upcoming season. We're going to start with Fox Lake-Rutland congestion, and this is obviously one of concern, especially for tomorrow, given the aggressive wind forecast we're currently seeing. Right now, what we typically see drive that is seasonal south to north power flows towards Minneapolis-St. Paul, again to serve heating loads, but we're also seeing some weakness in the supply stack in that region, which may help to further drive that. As I just mentioned, strong wind generation also a factor in seeing this congestion. And then for September, what we were seeing was line worker on Freeborn to Winnebago from the 15th until the 30th, so wrapped up earlier this week. Next was Wheatland congestion. We have a long-term line outage at Funsonville to Eugene, already out of service and scheduled to remain out of service until the 28th of November. And what we're seeing there is that kind of push across the Illinois-Indiana border, especially if we see any weakness in the western Indiana supply stack. We see any of that coal-fired generation step out for maintenance or any weakness in gas output. Again, downside impact on Illinois hub and an upside impact on Indiana hub. Next up is Harmony-Lansing in that DPC region. We have line worker on Lower to Turkey River scheduled in September into October. We also have line worker on Alma to Wabaco, scheduled again to start earlier in September and run here until the early part of 2015. What we see there is any sort of pull into the DPC region, and recently in the news we have been seeing a lot of concern about coal deliveries into that Dairyland power area. So again, an area to watch for going forward. Moving into MISO South now, we have Addis Tiger congestion, something we see actively with this longer-term line work around Willow Glen to Brittany. Started at the end of August and is scheduled to run until the end of this month. This is one of the most frequently occurring real-time constraints in September. and we're expecting to see that potentially post until the end of this line outage the rest of this month. Lastly, to wrap up here, South Prairie South Chalmers congestion, a concern here as we move into fall. As Jefferson mentioned earlier, central zone wind generation really goes through a rapid growth over the fall season, hitting that just under 50% output of the capacity factor. And so what we're seeing there is potential of strong wind output and ramp up in that Indiana area, and long-term line work at Monticello East Winnemac, which helps to kind of shift that constraint risk further down the system. Currently scheduled to end in January of the upcoming year, and what we're seeing there is potentially a little bit more of a pull northward as temperatures cool, and some of the outages we're seeing in the nuclear supply stack in Michigan. So now to move into some market changes that we're seeing move around MISO. The first is our hurdle rate. This has to do with the changes we saw as a result of the MISO South integration back in December of last year. First, we saw the change from ORCA interface congestion over to the sub-regional power balance constraint. Furthering that, on July 16th, MISO submitted a tariff to FERC to essentially implement a hurdle rate to recover costs of what MISO expects to be charged by SPP when that 1,000 megawatt threshold is violated. Again, it's based on a demand curve and when that violation of 1,000 megawatts occurs. Right now, it's kind of a true-up process and is allowed for monthly updating should we need to step away from that $9.57 per megawatt hour figure. Next up is ELMP implementation. ELMP was originally scheduled to start earlier this week, actually, on 10/1. MISO has actually petitioned FERC, though, to extend that until the end of the year due to some other changes in the system. What we're seeing there is that ELMP is going to give MISO the ability to dispatch units under economic minimum levels, as well as give offline fast start units the ability to set price. And there are essentially two circumstances around when you would see ELMP dispatch versus a normal traditional dispatch. The first is reserve scarcity. So if MISO is approaching those peak load levels, not necessarily seeing the summer, but certainly during last winter's polar vortex, you would see these kind of units called on to start early. The second would be any kind of transmission constraint violations. So again, if we're seeing units needed to help relieve ORCA congestion or sub-regional power balance, or any kind of generation weak areas where you may only have one or two constraints that will help alleviate a constraint, units to help alleviate a constraint, you may see that called on. Lastly, MISO looks like they're adopting this in an attempt to reduce some of that RSG charge, which is a lot of kind of unknown costs associated with trading in MISO. Lastly here, MISO recently floated out an email regarding changes to the day-ahead market, most notably the day-ahead close. In order to kind of coordinate better with the gas day, MISO is looking at moving its day-ahead market close up till 9 a.m. Eastern. That would mean that the day-ahead close results would come out 2 hours earlier and would help with kind of the intraday gas nomination process. Right now, MISO is in its early stages and has no firm deadline for when they expect to see this implemented. But really what we're seeing again is MISO attempting to comply with FERC policy to impact the scheduling of interstate natural gas pipelines. And again, this is kind of stemming from some of the issues we saw result, not necessarily in MISO, but in neighboring RTOs from the polar vortex when gas scheduling was hard to come by. Again, just one small change in addition to all of the major changes that this would kind of signal is that MISO would begin to follow daylight saving time, which it currently does not and is really the only major RTO that doesn't. So that would start lining us up with all of the other surrounding regions to help better with some of that coordination. But that does kind of wrap it up for us. My contact information, should you have any questions, is on this slide. And if you have any questions about the actual demand outlook, our meteorologist, Patrick Higgins, is happy to take your questions as well. We're going to take a look at some of the questions that have come across, and we'll be right back. So the first question we had was regarding the RSG, and we would agree that the recent kind of weak summer demand was definitely at play in terms of the weak RSG usage that we saw. MISO was able to commit much better, and you saw a lot of real-time imports also coming in to help offset any days where we were expecting to see RSG use. But again, looking at kind of what we were seeing, again, with a lot of weaker demand over that summer, we think that was definitely in play when we were seeing that weaker RSG use. The second question we had come across was with regards to constraints that we thought would be reduced by ELMP. Looking at what we have currently, I think what you might see being reduced at that point would be some of those areas that Jefferson touched upon, where you're seeing a kind of weak gen stack, such as the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, where you have unit retirements that are delayed because of essentially imbalances in the system. I mentioned the subregional power balance. If you're able to bring on some of those more expensive gas units in the region to help offset that difference, that may also help. And again, as I mentioned with some of that DPC area, with that Harmony-Lansing congestion, you're looking at some of those areas where if you're going to be impacted by a lack of delivery of coal and you have the ability to switch over to gas, if at all possible, that might be something we see as well. I think that was all we had for questions here today. Again, if you do have any other ones, please feel free to reach out to us. As I mentioned before the broadcast started, we will be sending out a collection of slides to everyone who is registered. Thank you again for taking the time to join us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.